Welcome to class, everyone. Take a seat. As students of history, we spend a lot of time analyzing the grand policies, the fierce elections, and the sweeping legislation of our commanders-in-chief. But today, we're going to examine the historical record from a vastly different angle. So let's jump right into this explainer and unpack the wild, tragic, and honestly sometimes bizarre history of how U.S. presidents actually met their end. Because, as we'll see, how a leader leaves this world almost always profoundly impacts the nation they leave behind.
I mean, seriously, what do raw cherries, unsterilized medical tools, and the 4th of July all have in common? Well, I'm going to show you exactly how these three seemingly random things are tied to some of the most fascinating presidential demises in American history. They perfectly highlight the very real, unexpected vulnerabilities of the men holding the highest office in the land. Section 1, the July 4th Curse, a spooky temporal clustering. Now, we absolutely have to start with the founders, the very architects of the nation, because there's this insane temporal cluster that happened early in U.S. history. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, you know them as two absolute titans of the Revolution. They drafted and defended the Declaration of Independence, became bitter political rivals, and then eventually reconnected as pen pals in their twilight years. And then they died on the exact same day, July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after signing the Declaration. And if that's not wild enough, they were followed 5 years later by our fifth president, James Monroe, who also died on the 4th of July. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, he almost made it a trifecta, but passed away just a few days shy of the holiday. The historical irony here is just profound. John Adams, completely unaware that his longtime frenemy Jefferson had died just hours earlier from a kidney infection, uttered these famous last words from his deathbed in Massachusetts. Thomas Jefferson survives. The historical impact of these founders leaving us on the very birthday of the nation they built, it literally left the entire country in a state of absolute awe. Section 2, bizarre demises and bad medicine, bloodletting, cherries, and soup. Moving into the 18th and 19th centuries, we see how horrific medical malpractice and some weird diet choices took out our commanders-in-chief. Medicine back then was, frankly, a lot more dangerous than the diseases themselves. Take George Washington, the man who set the precedent for the presidency itself. He developed a severe throat infection after riding his horse in the freezing snow. But instead of the antibiotics we just popped today, doctors employed bloodletting, eventually draining an estimated 80 ounces of his blood. To put that into perspective, that's the equivalent volume of about 6 Red Bulls. By trying to cure him, they effectively drained the life from the nation's most revered figure, making things way, way worse. And even the toughest, era-defining figures weren't immune to the ailments of the time. Think about Andrew Jackson, a guy who famously survived duels and, quite literally, beat up his own would-be assassin with a cane. Well, he suffered from dropsy, which is this debilitating water retention condition, before eventually passing away. And then we have Zachary Taylor. During a sweltering 4th of July celebration, Taylor tried to cool off by downing raw cherries and cold milk. Now, food safety was practically non-existent back then, right? And because pre-Civil War tensions were so incredibly high, a lot of folks actually believed the sitting president had been poisoned. But forensic science in the 1990s proved that nope, it was just fatal gastroenteritis from bad cherries. Contrasting with those dramatic battlefield commander exits, Zachary Taylor's successor, Millard Fillmore, had a much quieter end. Before dying of a stroke, he literally spent his final breath giving a 5-star review to a bowl of soup, stating, "The nourishment is palatable." I mean, what a way to go. But perhaps the greatest tragedy of 19th century medicine hit James Garfield. Garfield was shot in the back by a mentally unstable man at a train station. The thing is, the bullet completely missed all his vital organs. He absolutely should have survived. So the crucial takeaway here is that Garfield didn't really die from the assassin's bullet at all. He was the tragic victim of 19th century medical malpractice. Doctors repeatedly probed his wounds with dirty, unsterilized fingers and instruments, causing massive infections that slowly killed him over 80 agonizing days. Okay, Section 3, Tragedies in Office, the Era of Assassinations. Shifting the tone of our lecture a bit here, we really must look at the darker turning points in history where sitting presidents were actually murdered. These were shockwave moments that violently altered the trajectory of the American Republic. We begin, of course, with Abraham Lincoln, arguably one of the greatest presidents in history, who successfully navigated the nation through the brutal Civil War.
Yet, his final words weren't some grand proclamation about the Union. They were actually just casual reassurances to his wife. When Mary Todd asked what their friend would think of them holding hands in the presidential box at Ford's Theater, he whispered, "She won't think anything about it," just moments before John Wilkes Booth fired his weapon. Fast forward to the dawn of the 20th century. William McKinley was leading America into its new era as a global power. But at a public meet and greet up in Buffalo, an anarchist named Leon Czolgosz concealed a revolver under a handkerchief and shot him right in the abdomen. And just like with Garfield, doctors couldn't locate the bullet, and a deadly game of surgical operation led to severe gangrene. McKinley delivered this deeply poetic acceptance of his fate to his wife before slipping away, saying, "We are all going. We are all going. God's will be done, not ours." His death forced a massive pivot in American leadership, suddenly bringing the incredibly energetic and progressive Theodore Roosevelt into power. It also triggered a massive institutional change. Americans were officially fed up with their leaders being killed. This specific tragedy led directly to the Secret Service gaining full-time responsibility for protecting the president, making this a vital, absolutely crucial shift in presidential security that still impacts exactly how our government operates to this very day. But as we know, despite these protections, tragedies still occurred. In Dallas, the wife of the Texas governor turned to John F. Kennedy in his open motorcade and said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." Just seconds before a sniper's bullet struck him, JFK offered this chilling final agreement. "No, you certainly can't." The youngest elected president was killed at just 46 years old, leaving a permanent scar on the American psyche. Moving on to Section 4, Modern Medicine and Longevity. Reaching the century mark. Let's move into the 20th and 21st centuries, where top-notch medical care drastically extended presidential lifespans, allowing our leaders to become elder statesmen long, long after their terms ended. Take Gerald Ford, the man tasked with healing the nation after the whole Watergate scandal. Even while battling major vascular issues like cerebrovascular disease and arteriosclerosis, modern medicine helped him live peacefully to the ripe old age of 93, which actually set a new longevity record at the time of his passing. Then there's George H.W. Bush, who oversaw the end of the Cold War. He suffered from Parkinson's in his final years, which unfortunately left him wheelchair-bound. But what a beautiful final moment is captured here. His poignant last words were spoken over the phone to his son, fellow President George W. Bush, "I love you too." And then we have the ultimate historical milestone. Jimmy Carter set the sheer longevity record, living to be an astounding 100 years old before passing away from natural causes on December 29, 2024. I mean, it's just incredible to see a president reach the century mark, passing peacefully after stating he was finally ready to see his recently departed wife Rosalind again. It really shows just how far we've come from the days of fatal raw cherries and literal bloodletting, right? Which brings us to Section 5, the final tally, presidential lifespans by the numbers. Now let's step back for a second, look at the big picture, and evaluate the grand statistical summary of our historical source data. This brilliantly illustrates the evolution of presidential health. Over in the 18th and 19th centuries, the average lifespan of a president was 70 years old. But by the 20th century, that average jumps to 78. So the combination of Secret Service protection and modern medical science has effectively added nearly an entire decade to the average presidential life. But make no mistake here, despite modern longevity, the presidency remains the most dangerous job in the world. Exactly 8 presidents have died while serving in office. 4 were assassinated, completely cutting short their historical impact, and 4 died from natural causes while bearing the immense weight of the office. Which brings us to our final numbers today, 46 and 100. From the tragic assassination of JFK at just 46 years old to Jimmy Carter's peaceful passing at a full century, the spectrum of presidential deaths is a massive, fascinating puzzle that reflects the very growth, struggles, and scientific advancements of the United States itself. And honestly, don't even get me started on the insane coincidences between the Lincoln and JFK assassinations. But as any good history professor will tell you, that is a lesson for another day.